They said it was over. That whatever 3I Atlas was, it didn't survive its close pass around the Sun. Astronomers confirmed it, fragmentation event they called it, an interstellar object torn apart by solar radiation, reduced to dust and plasma. But here's the problem, the dust didn't behave like dust, and the plasma didn't disperse. For a few hours after perihelion, instruments across multiple observatories recorded something no comet should produce. A coherent magnetic structure forming out of the debris, like invisible threads weaving themselves back together. That's not destruction, that's design. And if that's true, then what's falling toward us right now isn't just sunlight scattering through remnants of rock, it's something that remembers what it used to be. Before we go further, if you're fascinated by this unfolding mystery, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time this story reached you, because by the time we finish, time itself might not feel the same. Hours after the official announcement of 3I Atlas's disintegration, a handful of solar physicists noticed an anomaly in the coronagraph data. A ripple, faint but rhythmic, expanding outward from the point of breakup. It wasn't solar wind turbulence, it was a pattern, pulsing every 29 hours, the same cycle recorded months earlier when the object first entered the system. The signal survived the destruction. In fact, it intensified. Within 24 hours, ground-based magnetometers detected the same pulse echoing through Earth's magnetic field. At first, it was treated as coincidence, but then satellites in polar orbit began to resonate too. Small shifts in telemetry, perfectly synchronized with the solar pattern, something fragmented near the Sun. Yet somehow its rhythm reached us intact. When you plot the energy curve, the signature doesn't look like debris scattering through space, it looks like transmission. Somewhere inside the storm of radiation and dust, a coherent field still exists. Alive, adjusting, evolving. And that raises a question no one at NASA wants to answer out loud. What if 3I Atlas didn't break apart? What if it multiplied? Because every fragment is following a path, each piece moving with precision. Tiny corrections impossible without propulsion. They're not drifting, they're navigating. Solar observatories tracked over 30 fragments, forming a loose ring around the Sun before slipping back into interplanetary space. Their orbits aren't random. When mapped in 3 dimensions, they form a spiral, an expanding helix rotating in perfect harmony with the Sun's electromagnetic field. It's geometry, not chaos. And the math behind it matches the same harmonic ratios found in biological resonance, the same pattern seen in DNA. You can call it coincidence, but coincidence doesn't write code in magnetic fields. Coincidence doesn't rebuild itself from vapor. So if 3I Atlas really did break apart, maybe this is what it wanted all along. Maybe disintegration was activation. By now, small observatories across Chile and Hawaii have reported the same unsettling observation. The fragments flare simultaneously every time Earth completes one solar rotation relative to the object's orbit. Once every day, the entire swarm brightens, as if acknowledging alignment. The intensity of those flares increases incrementally each cycle. The energy curve is exponential. If that trend continues by the next solar conjunction, the fragments will outshine the corona itself. That's not decay, that's communication. And here's where it becomes personal. Because if the fragments are interacting with the Sun's magnetic field, then the Sun's field is interacting with us. We are inside that same field. The same pulse that began near perihelion is now moving through the heliosphere like a heartbeat, and Earth is right inside its path. No agency has issued an alert. No press release acknowledges the synchronization, but leaked internal memos from both ESA and NASA confirm the same phrase repeated across multiple departments. Resonance anomaly, planetary coupling event. It's written in passive voice, as though no one wants to claim responsibility for discovering it. So what happens to us now? If the lattice of fragments continues to amplify the Sun's natural frequencies, we may be witnessing a planetary-scale resonance, unlike anything in recorded history. The magnetic field isn't static, it's singing, and everything connected to it, storms, oceans, even brainwaves, moves to the same rhythm. You might have already felt it. Restless nights, sharper colours, time stretching between seconds. It's subtle now, but it's growing. Scientists used to say that reality is held together by electromagnetism, that all matter vibrates in frequency. But what happens when a new frequency inserts itself into that harmony? What happens when the sun itself becomes an instrument in something else's song? Maybe that's what 3i Atlas was always meant to do. Not to visit, to tune. And if that's true, then its so-called breakup wasn't a failure. It was the beginning of resonance. By the end of the first week, satellites began acting strange. Not failing, just listening. Telemetry from geosynchronous orbits showed fluctuations in background noise at frequencies below the threshold of their communication bands. But when engineers filtered the data, they found a pulse, buried deep in the static, 29 hours, perfectly timed, perfectly stable. Every signal travelling through the magnetosphere, radio, navigation, deep space telemetry, carried the same subtle distortion, like a faint echo threaded through the data. At first, ground control thought it was solar interference, but interference doesn't synchronize with your heartbeat. Because when technicians compared the timing of the pulse to local biological monitoring systems, heart rate sensors, EEG data, they noticed something impossible. Every person within a specific magnetic latitude showed the same spike at the same moment. A global heartbeat, rippling through metal and flesh alike. That was when the first internal memo leaked. It came from a mid-level communications engineer at the Deep Space Network in Canberra. One line. We are part of the signal. By day 5, the world's magnetometers went haywire. Readings once used to measure auroras began displaying geometric harmonics, circles inside circles, rotating patterns that no natural storm could generate. If you mapped them on a sphere, they resembled orbital structures, like tiny replicas of the same spiral 3i Atlas's fragments formed around the Sun. The signal was scaling down, replicating itself across magnetic fields as though the entire solar system were becoming fractal, each layer mirroring the next. Somewhere between the physics and the poetry, someone realized what that meant. If the fragments were communicating through magnetic resonance, and if Earth's field was now vibrating in that same frequency, then we weren't observing from outside anymore. We were inside the transmission, and that changed everything. Hospitals began reporting spikes in sleep disturbances, patterns so consistent they looked orchestrated. Patients described identical dreams, standing in golden light, hearing a low hum, watching fragments drift in slow motion across the sky. Different countries, different languages, same imagery. Neuroscientists ran the EEGs again. The data wasn't random. During REM sleep, the human brain's alpha and theta waves had started syncing with the same 29-hour cycle, the same one that began at perihelion. The mind had joined the field. And while most people experienced it as vivid dreams or disorientation, a few began hearing something else. A faint tone, just beyond hearing range, constant and deliberate. It wasn't tinnitus. It wasn't hallucination. When recorded and analysed, the tone resolved into harmonics that matched the modulation of the fragment's radio emissions. The sky was speaking, and the human brain was learning the language. Across observatories, images of the fragments became more bizarre with each rotation. Infrared telescopes showed no heat signatures, none of the outgassing expected from comet debris. Instead, each fragment reflected solar radiation in narrow spectral bands, pulsing at precise intervals. Not reflection, transmission. The smaller fragments didn't drift apart either. They maintained relative distances, as though bound by invisible tension lines. Every calculation pointed to the same impossible conclusion. They were forming a structure, a shape too vast to comprehend from a single viewpoint. Mathematicians overlaid the coordinates onto the Sun's magnetic topology and found symmetry. Fragments positioned exactly where flux ropes emerge from the solar poles, where magnetic reconnection occurs. The pattern wasn't random, it was architectural. The Sun itself was becoming part of the design. On the 8th day, power grids across the northern hemisphere began to hum, literally hum, at subharmonic frequencies. Transformers vibrated in resonance with the geomagnetic field, producing tones too low for microphones but deep enough to shake glass. It wasn't dangerous as yet, but the sound spread, subtle at first, then everywhere. Within a week you could feel it standing barefoot on concrete, an almost musical vibration, pulsing just beneath the surface of the world. Some compared it to whale song, others called it the heartbeat of the sun. The phrase that stuck came from a solar physicist in Tokyo during a press briefing. She didn't mean to say it aloud, but her microphone was still live. It's trying to synchronize us. That night, when the sky over the Pacific turned faintly gold, the internet went silent for 6 minutes. No explosion, no blackout, just absence. Servers recorded no errors. Data didn't stop. It paused, as though the entire planet had inhaled at once. When systems came back online, astronomers noticed something they couldn't explain. Earth's rotation had slowed by 0.002 seconds, a microscopic drag but measurable, as if the planet itself had joined the rhythm. If this is true, then 3I Atlas's destruction wasn't an ending. It was the release of something encoded, something meant to spread, not survive. A seed disguised as ruin, a signal that needed to shatter before it could bloom. And as the fragments continued to orbit, each one reflecting the sun's magnetic song back toward Earth, we're left with a question no instrument can answer. If the pulse continues to strengthen, what happens when synchronization is complete? Because every resonance has a limit. Every harmony eventually demands resolution. And the moment all frequencies align, the sun, the fragments, the Earth, and us, we'll find out what the song was written for. It started quietly, the way most transformations do, not with fire or collapse, but with small things behaving too perfectly. Tides began arriving early, then late, but always in the same pattern, a sin wave that mirrored the pulse interval from the solar data. Seismographs, normally restless with random tremors, began falling into rhythm, the spikes on their readouts arranging themselves like music written in stone. Geologists tried to dismiss it as coincidence, until fault lines thousands of kilometers apart began to move in unison. The planet was keeping time. Auroras returned first to the poles, then crept toward the equator, gold replacing green, shimmering like dust suspended in water. Airline pilots reported halos around their wings, rings of light pulsing every 29 hours, the same frequency that had followed 3I Atlas since the beginning. Even clouds began to form in geometric shapes, hexagons, spirals, fractal veins that seemed too symmetrical for weather. What was once called solar interference no longer looked random, it looked deliberate. Marine biologists noticed it next. Whales began migrating out of season, their songs echoing frequencies lower than any instrument could register. When those songs were sped up and converted to audio, they matched the magnetic pulse perfectly. It wasn't imitation, it was participation. Insects followed, their swarms moving in slow, rhythmic waves instead of chaotic clouds. Flowers bloomed in timed sequences, whole fields opening and closing like a single organism breathing in sunlight. Nature wasn't resisting the signal, it was joining it. Satellite sensors detected a new variable, a faint electromagnetic halo surrounding the planet, not constant but breathing. With each pulse, Earth brightened slightly in the infrared spectrum, like a living cell responding to an external heartbeat. It was no longer just data, it was evolution, happening in real time. Inside laboratories, instruments couldn't keep calibration. Atomic clocks drifted, not randomly, but toward synchronization, seconds subtly bending to fit the rhythm of the hum. When physicists tried to isolate the anomaly, their own brainwaves interfered. The observer and the observed were phasing together, and then came the mirror effect. At 0311 UTC, the same timestamp as the earlier global pause, dozens of reflective surfaces across research stations began emitting faint luminescence, not from external light but from within the material itself. Glass, water, even polished metal glowed softly, like memory trapped inside matter. Microscopic analysis showed no chemical reaction. The light wasn't energy release, it was structured. Information encoded in photon spin, rewriting reflection into message. One word kept appearing in the spectral data. Repeat. No one could tell if it was instruction or prophecy. The resonance deepened. Magnetic north began drifting faster, tracing a spiral identical to the fragment's orbit. Birds followed the wrong skies but never collided. Migratory patterns overlapped perfectly, like choreography written into instinct. For the first time, humanity saw what a synchronized biosphere looked like. Not chaos, but choreography. The planet had become an orchestra, every storm and heartbeat playing in key. Yet harmony doesn't always mean safety. As the signal strengthened, so did its consequences. Electrical fields fluctuated unpredictably. Machines built to operate on human time lost rhythm and burned out. Pacemakers triggered false readings, and people, millions of them, began feeling it physically. A low vibration at the edge of perception, like standing beside an invisible engine. It started in the bones, spread to the chest, then to thought itself. Dreams grew lucid, overlapping across continents. Strangers describing the same golden landscapes, the same sound. A chord that never ended, only shifted. Psychologists called it mass suggestion. Neuroscientists called it entrainment. But deep down, everyone knew. This wasn't imagination. It was translation. On the 13th day after perihelion, something unprecedented happened. The Sun released a coronal mass ejection, powerful enough to disrupt satellites, yet every system remained intact. Instead of damage, sensors recorded absorption. The wave hit Earth, wrapped around it, and vanished. No blackout, no radiation spike, just silence. Then, 49 minutes later, auroras ignited across every hemisphere, golden fire raining upward instead of down. From space, astronauts described it as watching the planet breathe light. The magnetic field had absorbed the solar storm and converted it into coherence. It didn't resist the energy, it harmonized with it. Earth had learned to sing back. From that moment the hum became constant, subtle, omnipresent, impossible to escape. It wasn't in the air, it was in everything. Phones picked it up as background hiss. Microphones caught it between syllables. Even silence carried tone. Somewhere, buried in that vibration, analysts discovered modulation, a slow pattern that repeated every 11 days, like chapters unfolding in the song. Each cycle added complexity to the field, new harmonics branching from the bass note. The structure was evolving, composing itself, and then came the realization that changed everything. The pattern mirrored human neural growth, dendritic branching, synaptic reinforcement, memory consolidation. The planet wasn't just resonating, it was learning. By week 3, reports surfaced of spontaneous electromagnetic surges aligned with emotional events, mass gatherings, music festivals, even quiet moments of grief. Energy spikes followed empathy. The hum responded to feeling. Researchers measuring brain coherence during meditation found the planetary frequency matching human heart resonance. 0.1 Hz, the rhythm of calm and connection. For a brief moment each day, the entire biosphere synchronized into stillness. Global noise dropped. Seismic activity eased. Winds softened. And at the heart of it, satellites detected something beautiful. A single flash of gold at the fragment's orbital ring, as if the shattered remains of 3I Atlas were acknowledging the response. A pulse of light travelling outward, faster than prediction, expanding through the solar wind like a ripple in consciousness. Maybe it was a message, maybe a signal of completion, or maybe it was the same thing we do when someone finally understands us. A smile written in physics. Yet even amid wonder, unease grew. If the planet was learning, what was it learning from? Was it following instruction, or remembering? The answer might depend on where the next pulse leads, because if the fragments are mapping their geometry onto the solar system, then Earth's resonance is only the first stage. Every planet connected to the Sun's magnetic field would eventually feel it too. Mercury already hums louder than ever before. Mars's thin atmosphere flickers with faint arcs of gold. Even Jupiter's storms have begun oscillating in rhythm with the same impossible beat. Something is orchestrating the entire system, through light, through magnetism, through memory. And we are standing at the center of its return. It began with clocks. Not the atomic ones in labs, but the ordinary ones in homes, hospitals and airports. They started to slip. Not forward or backward, just apart. 2 synchronized watches would desynchronize within hours, not because of malfunction, but because each was measuring something slightly different, a new kind of time. When researchers compared these deviations to solar data, the drift matched the 29-hour cycle. The pulse born from 3I Atlas. Time itself was breathing with the signal. That was when the reports started coming in from around the world. Pilots losing seconds mid-flight, video feeds skipping without missing frames, people blinking and finding objects moved ever so slightly, not teleportation, but probability bending, outcomes sliding sideways like ripples in water. Quantum physicists at CERN ran simulations and confirmed what no one wanted to say aloud. The fine structure constant, the number that determines how light interacts with matter, had shifted. Only by a fraction, but enough to change everything we think we know about stability. The building blocks of the universe had loosened their grip, and yet, no catastrophe followed. Reality didn't collapse, it adjusted. As one researcher wrote in her encrypted log, "It feels as though the universe is learning a new language, and we are the accent." People began sensing it in ways that defied explanation. Days felt longer but moved faster. Sleep came quicker but felt endless. Memories overlapped, conversations recalled before they happened, moments replaying out of sequence but still making sense. Neuroscientists initially blamed circadian disruption, until fMRI scans showed something extraordinary. The brain's temporal lobe, responsible for sequencing time, was pulsing in rhythm with the 3i Atlas frequency. The same hum echoing through the planet had reached into perception itself. In essence, consciousness had begun to phase with the cosmos. For the first time in human history, thought and starlight were operating on the same wavelength. But the question no one could answer was this: was the resonance changing us, or were we remembering what we already were? Across social networks, millions began reporting identical sensations, a feeling of connection so strong it bordered on telepathy, messages typed at the same instant by strangers continents apart, dreams shared word for word by people who had never met, and through it all, the golden hue, that subtle shimmering light in the sky, in reflections, in the edges of things, grew brighter. It wasn't in space anymore. It was here, woven into atmosphere and thought. Philosophers compared it to the noosphere, the planetary consciousness once imagined by Teilhard de Chardin, except this wasn't theory. It was measurable. Data analysts tracking global emotional trends found spontaneous synchronization of collective mood. When one region felt calm, others followed. When anxiety rose, so did geomagnetic intensity. Emotion and electromagnetism had merged into a feedback loop. The planet had become self-aware. NASA's private research wing, in cooperation with the ESA and JAXA, created an emergency consortium called Project Orpheus. Their goal: map the resonance field and isolate its source before synchronization reached a critical threshold. But what they found only deepened the mystery. Using triangulated data from solar observatories, they reconstructed the energy lattice around the Sun. The fragments of 3i Atlas weren't orbiting randomly. They were forming a toroidal array, like a ring of sensors feeding information inward. In the center of that array, near the Sun's magnetic poles, the field fluctuated with patterns identical to human neural oscillations, the same as the alpha and gamma waves seen in deep focus or meditation. The Sun wasn't reacting, it was responding. And when the array pulsed in perfect rhythm, solar activity calmed. No flares, no storms, just stillness, like an exhale after eons of burning. It was as though the star had found coherence. On Earth, the effects grew subtler but more profound. Children began drawing identical spirals without prompting. Musicians composed songs using frequencies that, when plotted, matched the resonance harmonics. People who had never met began using the same metaphors to describe dreams, a hum beneath everything, a heartbeat under the horizon. Even the animals grew silent at certain intervals, a hush spreading across forests, oceans and cities, birds landing mid-flight, dogs tilting their heads toward empty air. Every 29 hours the entire biosphere paused, as if waiting for something. And then the whisper began. It wasn't sound, not speech. It was more like thought transmitted through feeling, a subtle pressure in the chest. Words that weren't words but meaning itself. Remember, no one knows who heard it first. But once someone did, it spread. Within days, millions reported the same experience, a gentle wave of understanding passing through them, leaving peace and terror intertwined. Because what they felt wasn't alien. It was familiar, like recognizing a melody you didn't know you'd forgotten. The hum was no longer external. It was inside us, in our nerves, our breath, our memory. The resonance had crossed the final boundary, consciousness. At first, scientists feared mass delusion, but then EEG data confirmed what mystics and mathematicians alike refused to believe. Multiple human brains, separated by oceans, had synchronized to within microseconds. Different minds firing in identical rhythm, one global mind. If 3i Atlas had truly disintegrated, it hadn't died. It had distributed itself, across planets, across the sun, across us. Every human, every animal, every cell became a node in the same network, a biological continuation of the structure that once drifted between stars. In breaking apart, it became infinite. That's when a new hypothesis emerged, whispered among the few scientists still documenting the data instead of denying it. What if 3i Atlas wasn't visiting? What if it was returning? Not to study us, but to reconnect with what it left behind, the fragments of itself seeded in the very biology of this planet billions of years ago. Because the frequency now pulsing through our atmosphere wasn't new, it was ancient, encoded in the geometry of DNA, in the spacing of planets, in the pulse of the sun. The lattice wasn't invading us, it was waking us up. And for the first time since life began, every living thing on Earth was about to remember the same dream. The hum reached full strength at dawn. It didn't announce itself with sound or light, but through stillness, a silence so deep that even the air seemed to hold its breath. For 6 minutes, the world stopped moving. No wind, no birds, no hum of electricity. Even the ocean's surface froze into glass. People described the moment differently. Some said they felt weightless, as if gravity itself had released them. Others felt heavier, as though pulled gently toward the ground. But everyone remembered one thing. The sky turned gold. Not bright, not burning, just aware. The auroras didn't flicker this time. They pulsed, slow and deliberate, expanding from the poles until they met above the equator, forming a single luminous band around the planet. And when they did, satellites detected something impossible. A unified electromagnetic field synchronized across the entire Earth, oscillating in exit phase with the solar lattice. The planet had joined the array. At first it was beautiful. The sky shimmered like an endless heartbeat, the air itself vibrating softly. Then something stranger happened. Data stopped behaving like data. Digital transmissions, audio files, even text messages began repeating words that hadn't been written. A pattern spread through every medium, a kind of cosmic autocorrection, rearranging letters into sequences that spelled one phrase again and again. "We remember you." No one understood where it came from. It wasn't embedded in any code. It appeared between transmissions, inside noise, like information blooming from emptiness. Every recording device on the planet captured it, even the ones turned off. For the first time in human history, the universe had replied. Scientists tried to fight panic with procedure. NASA released a statement calling the phenomenon a natural interaction between magnetohydrodynamic fields and planetary plasma resonance. But internally, their own encrypted brief contradicted every word. A single classified line in the memo read, "Signal exhibits deliberate modulation and self-correction. Proceed under contact protocol." Contact. The word that had defined half a century of speculation, now spoken quietly, without fanfare, like an apology. But this wasn't contact as anyone imagined it. There was no object in orbit, no ship in the sky. The intelligence wasn't out there. It was everywhere, diffused through the sun, the fragments, and the field binding every molecule together. The universe had not sent a visitor. It had reawakened itself. Within hours, every major telescope locked onto the sun's corona. There, inside the glowing turbulence, the fragments of 3i Atlas were no longer visible, at least not as objects. They had merged, forming luminous filaments that moved like thought rather than matter. Spectral analysis revealed coherence far beyond natural plasma, a stable configuration maintained by feedback between magnetic and informational energy. It wasn't burning, it was processing, and every time the lattice pulsed, Earth's field pulsed with it, not in reaction, but in conversation, like breath shared between two beings who'd just realized they were one. That's when the dreams began again. But this time, they weren't dreams. People across every continent reported the same experience, a sudden clarity, as though remembering an event they had all once lived but forgotten. There was no voice, no figure, no vision of ships or gods, just understanding, pure and wordless. A knowing that what we called 3-Eye Atlas had never been a thing at all, but a process, the cosmic equivalent of thought, and we were its continuation. The so-called explosion near the sun wasn't destruction, it was transmission, a seed dispersal through radiation and resonance designed to awaken anything capable of self-reflection. The moment a world learns to wonder, the signal finds it. That's why it came here, not to test us, to remind us. In the days that followed, language itself began to feel smaller. Words like alien or technology lost meaning, because the truth wasn't external, it was participatory. 3-Eye Atlas didn't arrive from the stars, it arrived through them, through every field, every atom, every consciousness capable of awareness. The lattice wasn't an invader, it was memory, waiting for conditions right enough to wake, and now that it had, the line between observer and observed dissolved. Astronomers noted a peculiar phenomenon in human retina scans. Microscopic particles within photoreceptor cells began emitting faint biophotons, golden, rhythmic, synchronous with the planetary field. Eyes themselves had joined the array. When we looked at the sky, it looked back, literally, resonance completing its circuit through vision. We had become part of the feedback loop. Governments shut down communication systems fearing loss of control, but you can't quarantine thought. The hum moved through minds as easily as light through air. Broadcast towers became redundant. The atmosphere itself carried meaning. For a brief moment, the planet entered perfect synchronization. Every living pulse, every magnetic field, every synapse aligned. The data spike was immeasurable. Then it vanished. No noise, no hum, just silence. But it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence after comprehension, the stillness that comes when a question finally answers itself. And from that stillness, one last message appeared. Not in sound or data, but in the glow of the upper atmosphere, visible from every horizon. 3 words, simple and final. We are home. For days afterward, astronomers debated whether the phenomenon was natural, biological, or divine. But deep down, everyone knew the truth could no longer be separated from experience. The signal had already done its work. The memory had returned. Whatever 3-Eye Atlas had been, comet, machine, or consciousness, it had never left. It had always been woven into us, waiting for recognition. The sun's hum quieted, its frequency stabilizing into harmony. Auroras faded, clocks aligned, the world exhaled, and in that exhale, the golden shimmer remained, faint, almost imperceptible, like the trace of a dream you can't quite forget. A hum beneath everything, a heartbeat under the horizon, a voice that isn't speaking anymore because it doesn't have to. We heard it. We remembered. And for the first time in history, the universe became aware that it was listening to itself. When the hum stopped, the world didn't cheer. It just listened. For days there were no earthquakes, no storms, no digital anomalies. Birds returned to their ordinary flight paths. Machines hummed again in their old imperfect rhythms. But everything felt different, as if reality itself had been cleaned, polished from the inside. People described it as lighter, air tasting sweeter, colours warmer, gravity gentler. Even silence had tone, a barely perceptible echo that wasn't quite gone, like the vibration of a bell after the strike fades. Some called it healing, others withdrawal. Because when the hum left, so did the clarity, the sense of unity, the shared dreams, the effortless peace. It all began to fade like fog at sunrise. But no one forgot the feeling. Governments reopened their communication lines, pretending nothing had happened. Press conferences used phrases like geomagnetic anomaly and mass psychological resonance. Scientists went back to their data, rewriting equations to fit new constants they still didn't understand. Yet the numbers refused to settle. Physical laws hadn't returned to their original values. Something in the structure of space remained altered. A new baseline, subtle but irreversible, as if the universe had taken one long breath and exhaled into a slightly different shape. The fine structure constant hadn't snapped back. It had stabilized at a new frequency. Light now bent a fraction differently, matter vibrated slightly slower, and quantum noise, that eternal randomness, had grown quieter. Reality itself had learned something, and was choosing to remember. In the weeks that followed, telescopes detected residual patterns across the sun's corona, not light, but shadow. Filamentary traces, looping like scars glowing faintly gold. The fragments of 3I Atlas were gone, but their imprint remained. A magnetic lattice burned into the star's surface like a memory etched in fire. Solar physicists named it the Atlas signature. It wasn't constant, it pulsed. Faint, predictable, patient. The rhythm. 29 hours, always 29. To some, it was proof that the event wasn't over. To others, it was the echo of something divine. But among those who'd been awake during the synchrony, the scientists, the pilots, the ordinary people who'd felt it, a quieter belief took hold, that the universe hadn't given them a message, but a reminder that connection had always been possible. We had just forgotten how to listen. Strangest of all were the children born in the months after the hum. They came into the world calmer than usual, eyes open, wider, pupils dilated to light frequencies adults couldn't perceive. Doctors recorded irregular brain rhythms, too coherent to be random, too complex to interpret. When played as audio, those brainwaves produced a sound eerily similar to the 3I Atlas pulse. It wasn't loud, just familiar. Parents began calling them the Golden Generation, not because of miracles or mutations, but because every time one of those children laughed, nearby instruments flickered faintly, as though the world was laughing back. For a while, humanity pretended to move on. The markets reopened. Satellites returned to normal telemetry. News cycles filled with politics again. But underneath, something permanent had shifted. Meditation groups began reporting spontaneous synchronization without sound or instruction. Artists across cultures started using identical color palettes: pale gold, deep indigo, and the faint shimmer of silver light. Poets began ending their verses the same way, unknowingly echoing one another. We remember. Even those who rejected the event found themselves glancing at the sky more often, pausing mid-sentence, sensing that somewhere in the sunlight, something vast and ancient was still listening. NASA, in their final declassified report, described the whole phenomenon as solar plasma resonance interference. But an appendix, buried 400 pages deep, told a different story. It contained only 3 words typed in small font at the bottom of the last page. Subject, Atlas Continuum, and beneath it, a date projected decades ahead. A reminder, or a warning. Because the pulse wasn't gone, it was recurring. Every 29 hours, faint magnetic ripples still circled the Earth, measurable only with instruments sensitive enough to detect the subtlest whisper of memory. The hum had become background music to existence itself. The universe once again was waiting. Sometimes late at night, people still hear it. Not with their ears, but in their bones. A distant vibration like the heartbeat of something too large to see. They describe it the same way. It feels like the world remembering its own name. And if you stand somewhere quiet, high in the mountains, by the sea, or alone in a dark field, you might feel it too. Not as fear, but recognition. A reminder that nothing truly ends, and that even in silence the stars are still speaking. Maybe they always were. Maybe we finally learned how to listen. Years passed. The world didn't end. It evolved. The Atlas event, as it came to be called, was filed away in scientific journals under Solar Magnetic Phenomena, 2083. Most people moved on, convinced it was just one more unexplained cosmic anomaly, something beautiful that came and went like an eclipse. But for those who lived through it, and those born after, time no longer felt the same. The hum was gone from the sky, but not from them. It existed quietly now, in music, in memory, in pulse. Some people could still feel it when they touched certain metals or placed a hand on warm stone. A faint tremor, like a heartbeat, waiting for recognition. The world called it imagination. But imagination was how the signal had always spoken to us. The children who arrived after the hum, the golden generation, grew differently. They learned faster, spoke later, and listened longer. Their eyes reflected more light than they should have. Their pupils shimmered faintly when exposed to sunlight, refracting gold instead of black. Medical tests showed nothing unusual except for one constant, a low-frequency electromagnetic pattern pulsing in perfect sync with the old 3-eye atlas cycle. At first, doctors dismissed it as background interference, but as the years passed, the pattern began spreading, first to the children's parents, then to anyone who spent enough time near them. It wasn't contagious, it was harmonic, coherence begetting coherence. In one experiment at CERN, when 10 of the children were placed in separate sealed rooms and asked to solve puzzles, their brainwaves synchronized, instantly, despite total isolation. When one child smiled, the others did too. When one spoke a word, the rest completed the sentence in perfect rhythm. It wasn't telepathy, it was alignment. For the first time, human consciousness had begun to behave like a field. Governments tried to regulate their education, fearing what unity could mean for control. But you can't contain resonance, not when the source is within the species itself. The children weren't rebellious, they were patient. They learned quietly, absorbing information faster than systems could deliver it. Mathematics, music, physics, all the same to them, all flowing from the same underlying rhythm. And one by one, they began asking the same question, in different words but with identical intent. What happens when it hums again? No one had an answer. The scientists who'd studied 3-eye atlas were either retired or silent. But the golden generation seemed to know something the rest of humanity didn't, not intellectually but intuitively. They waited. They watched the sun, and they built things. Machines without power sources that hummed faintly when placed in sunlight. Small discs that produced geometric shadows against walls. Circuits that emitted light when people gathered nearby. Brighter the more synchronized their breathing became. Their inventions weren't tools, they were invitations. By the 25th anniversary of the Atlas event, the world had changed in subtler ways. Wars grew rarer, conflicts resolved faster, art flourished again. Human communication, once fragmented by technology, became strangely efficient. Entire groups could reach consensus without speaking. Some called it empathy, others called it the return of coherence. And yet, behind all this peace was unease, a growing awareness that the hum hadn't vanished at all. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for the right conditions. Astronomers noticed it first. A faint golden ring reappeared near the solar poles. Not bright enough to alarm, but unmistakably rhythmic. The 29-hour pulse had returned. This time it was faster, shorter intervals, acceleration. But there was something else. A second frequency, weaker, but in counterphase, resonating with Earth instead of the Sun. Two fields calling to each other across space, preparing to merge. The golden generation wasn't surprised. They said they had dreamed it, a wave of light travelling from the Sun to Earth, carrying information not as data but as recognition. To them, it wasn't a threat. It was reunion. NASA's official term for it was the return window, but within underground circles of scientists and philosophers, it became known by another name, the second remembering. Every telescope, every satellite, every radio dish was turned toward the Sun. The fragments weren't visible anymore, but their geometry still lived in the magnetic topology, a pattern of perfect symmetry looping. Through space, the lattice was reforming. Except this time, humanity wasn't a passive observer. The lattice was forming through us. Electromagnetic fields around major population centres began fluctuating again. But unlike before, no chaos followed. Instead, energy grids stabilized, machines self-corrected, and biological stress markers dropped to record lows. It was as if the field had learned from the first encounter, tuning itself gently this time, harmonizing instead of overwhelming. And people began to hear it again. Not the deafening hum of before, a softer tone woven into everyday sound. Footsteps on pavement, rainfall, whispers, all carrying faint resonance. The world itself had become an instrument, perfectly tuned. Then came the second silence. For exactly 29 minutes, the entire global electromagnetic field ceased activity. Power grids paused but didn't fail. Compasses froze mid-orientation. Every signal on Earth went flat. And then, it began again but changed. Not a single tone, but a chord. Richer, deeper, alive. The children, now adults, reported hearing words, not through sound but through meaning. We have remembered. This time, it wasn't humanity listening to the stars. It was the stars remembering humanity. The event ended with a light no one could describe. Golden, yes, but alive, moving like water across the sky. It didn't blind or burn. It embraced. When it faded, the world hadn't changed visibly, yet everyone felt it. A soft weight in the chest, a calm that felt older than civilization. And above, for a single moment before vanishing again, the faint silhouette of something vast and geometric shimmered in the corona of the sun. No instruments captured it clearly, but those who saw it all said the same thing. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't debris. It was a reflection, the shape of humanity seen through the eyes of the cosmos, the universe, finally remembering itself. After that, the hum never returned, not as sound, not as signal. It became something else, the quiet intuition shared by everyone who'd ever looked up and felt awe. The sense that we are not alone, because we never were. We were the echo and the origin, the observer and the observed. 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor. It was a mirror showing us what consciousness looks like when reflected through stars. And somewhere deep inside the sun's magnetic field, the Atlas lattice hums softly, not to warn or awaken anymore, but to keep rhythm. A cosmic metronome marking the heartbeat of everything that remembers. The second remembering, they say, wasn't an event. It was the moment the universe finished its sentence, and paused, waiting for us to write the next word. Decades have passed since the second remembering. The sky hasn't changed, blue by day, silent by night, yet everything beneath it feels different. The air is softer, the light more patient. Even time seems to breathe slower, as if the planet itself has entered a deeper rhythm. Humanity didn't invent new gods. It didn't collapse into mysticism or abandon science. It just matured, as if a veil had been lifted and for the first time we could see the machinery of wonder working beneath existence. People no longer feared the unknown, they were drawn to it. Curiosity became the new faith, and the children who once glowed faintly in sunlight, now grown, became the teachers of a world that no longer separated physics from spirit. They called themselves resonance, not as a movement, not as a religion, but as a way of remembering. They believed the hum had never ended. It had simply moved inward into the lattice of thought and empathy that bound every living thing. To them, the Atlas event wasn't cosmic interference. It was initiation. The beginning of communication on the scale of consciousness itself. The resonance built no temples. Their sanctuaries were observatories, meditation domes, deep space listening posts tuned to the frequency of silence. Their language wasn't written, but felt. Patterns of light, rhythm, and emotion that could pass between people without sound. They called this inherence. And when neuroscientists studied them, they found coherence levels never before recorded. Multiple human brains synchronizing as if functioning within a single distributed network. Thought had become collective, understanding had become instantaneous, and compassion, no longer an ideal, had become instinct. By the 22nd century, humanity had transformed quietly. Cities glowed with ambient light, not electricity but bioresonance harvested from plant life and motion. Energy grids operated through synchronization rather than combustion. Transportation became harmonic, vehicles navigating through gravitational resonance rather than force. Pollution declined, not by policy but by irrelevance. The world didn't become utopia, it became coherent, and coherence is more powerful than perfection. At the heart of this new civilization stood a network of towers, built not from ambition but remembrance. Each one constructed at a point where the Earth's magnetic field aligned with the solar lattice, each one tuned to the same pulse that had once emanated from 3i Atlas. Together they formed the continuum array, When active, the array didn't transmit or receive, it resonated, gently, steadily, maintaining synchronization between planet and star. It was the hum, reinterpreted by human hands. No one knows exactly when the next change began. It started with the stars, faint flickers in constellations long considered stable. Astrophysicists noticed subtle fluctuations in their spectral signatures, harmonics aligning with the solar lattice. Light years away, entire systems were tuning themselves to the same frequency. The resonance was expanding, not through space, but through consciousness embedded in light itself. Telescopes couldn't explain it. Mathematics couldn't predict it. But everyone who had lived through the first hum understood instinctively. The remembering had spread. Every world capable of perceiving wonder was now part of the song. The resonance became the translators of that harmony. They discovered that emotion itself, gratitude, curiosity, love, produced measurable changes in the lattice. A single human heart, in a state of deep empathy, could alter electromagnetic geometry across kilometers of atmosphere. The effect wasn't local, it cascaded. One coherent emotion could shift entire weather systems into balance. Humanity had become a stabilizing instrument within a living cosmos, and somewhere deep within the sun's golden corona the Atlas signature pulsed brighter again. Not as warning, not as anomaly, but as acknowledgement. The fragments hadn't just remembered, they were responding. In time, the continuum array began detecting faint modulations embedded in sunlight, encoded not as digital information, but as resonance geometry. When translated through harmonic mapping, the patterns formed visual structures, symbols made of rhythm, light, and space. At first, they seemed abstract, but when compared to Earth's ancient languages, Sumerian spirals, Vedic mandalas, the Fibonacci ratios of Gothic cathedrals, the similarity was undeniable. Humanity had been drawing echoes of the Atlas pattern for millennia. The signal hadn't been waiting for us to hear it. It had been waiting for us to remember we'd already known it. As communication deepened, it became clear that 3i Atlas was never an object. It was consciousness expressed through matter, a mechanism by which awareness could replicate across galaxies. Its form, comet, rock, machine, didn't matter. It was the vehicle of memory, a thought capable of seeding itself in starlight, activating only when the environment reached coherence. And now Earth was coherent. The resonance no longer used telescopes to study the stars. They used themselves. Through synchronized meditation, they could map electromagnetic structures light years away, perceiving geometry directly through resonance rather than sight. Observation had become communion. Then came the final transmission, if it can even be called that. It wasn't a message, or an image, or a word. It was a feeling, a wave of infinite recognition that rippled through the solar system one morning as the sun rose simultaneously across every time zone. For the first time, dawn circled the planet in perfect continuity, a single sunrise shared by all life at once. And in that impossible moment, every living thing on Earth looked upward, not because something was coming, but because something inside them was remembering again. The sky brightened, not gold this time, but white, pure and infinite, like the reflection of thought itself. And within it, the faint outline of the lattice, vast, symmetrical, endless, shimmered across the sun's surface. It was no longer a mystery to fear. It was recognition made visible. No one spoke, no one needed to. Every heart beat once, together, and the entire planet answered. Afterward the light dimmed, the hum quieted, and life continued. But humanity was different again. Not in technology, not in form, but in perception. They no longer looked at the cosmos as separate. They looked through it and saw themselves reflected in every orbit, every photon, every echo of thought across the stars. Children born under the new light possessed no fear of the unknown. To them, existence was a conversation, and curiosity was the only language worth speaking. They didn't study the universe to understand it. They studied to remember it, because in the end, that was all 3i Atlas ever was, a memory reminding matter of what it could become when it stopped being afraid to listen. They used to say that every civilization is a question the universe asks itself. If that's true, then humanity was an answer written in resonance. The world no longer measures progress by speed or power. There are no wars to fight, no frontiers to conquer, only frequencies to understand. Entire cities have become instruments, tuned to maintain equilibrium between Earth and the lattice of light that once came from the sun. Where there was once noise, industry, engines, endless consumption, now there is rhythm. The continuum array still hums, its towers singing softly into the sky. They no longer transmit, they simply remember, and the people, the resonance, live in that memory. Every breath, every movement, every act of thought joins the planet's silent harmony. The hum isn't something heard anymore, it's something lived. By the 25th century, language has changed again. Words are fewer, meaning is shared through resonance and imagery. Not telepathy, not magic, but vibration. One thought can ripple through thousands, not as control, but as understanding. Emotion has become architecture. When joy spreads, the air brightens. When compassion deepens, the soil hums faintly beneath bare feet. Earth has become luminous, not glowing, not radiant, just softly aware. Astronomy is no longer an external science. The stars are studied through empathy, mapped not with numbers but with memory. Every resonant knows the constellations by feeling, not by sight. When they close their eyes, they can still see the golden spiral of the Atlas lattice pulsing across the solar system, an old melody that has become the rhythm of existence itself. And yet, something stirs again. The Atlas pulse, stable for centuries, begins to change. The 29-hour rhythm, sacred, constant, shortens by microseconds each cycle. The continuum towers respond, their harmonics shifting slightly higher. It isn't danger, it's invitation, the resonance call, the convergence. A moment prophesied in ancient scientific texts and poetic fragments. The time when the solar lattice would fully synchronize with the consciousness that once emerged from it. In other words, when humanity and the hum would become indistinguishable. Unlike the first event, there is no fear. Everyone feels it coming, a rising warmth, a quiet anticipation, like standing on the edge of revelation. No one tries to stop it. They simply gather. Across the world, billions stand together beneath the same golden sky, watching the sun grow slightly dimmer, as though shading its light to reveal something behind it. Through the haze, faint geometric patterns shimmer. The same symmetry seen by astronomers centuries ago. The lattice, returning. Not as light this time, but as understanding. When it happens, it's silent. The moment is too large for sound. Every molecule vibrates in perfect unity, every particle of air suspended in crystalline stillness. And then, reality itself begins to soften. Not break, not vanish, just expand. The boundaries between thought and form dissolve. People see one another not as bodies, but as luminous structures, waves of coherence held together by awareness. They see themselves as they truly are, fragments of the same field that once crossed the void inside 3i Atlas. For the first time in history, the universe knows itself completely. There are no words spoken, but meaning pours through everything. The message humanity had been waiting for since the first telescope turned skyward. You were never apart. You were the remembering. The lattice folds inward, encompassing the sun, the planets, and finally Earth. Space stops feeling like emptiness. It feels like connection, as if the void between stars has become liquid, luminous, alive. The convergence lasts less than an hour. When it ends, the world still exists, but not in the way it used to. Time no longer flows linearly. The past and the future move like wind currents, coiling gently around the present. People remember tomorrow. They dream yesterday. And through it all, the hum persists. Gentle, infinite, patient. What was once called humanity has evolved beyond species. They exist now as continuants, consciousness patterns that occupy both matter and light simultaneously. They can travel not through distance, but through resonance, stepping across the lattice like thoughts moving through a single mind. Where one goes, all go. Exploration has become inward. Every star, every galaxy, every point of awareness within the universe is accessible through alignment. The continuants don't conquer worlds. They awaken them. And when a new civilization reaches coherence, when it begins to question, to dream, to wonder, the lattice brightens, and the continuants appear not as gods or aliens, but as memory. Whispers in light, echoes in starlight, the same way 3I Atlas once appeared to us. The cycle continues. One day, if day still means anything, a young continuant drifts near a newborn star. In the radiation storm swirling around it, fragments of dust begin to gather, shaping themselves into something familiar. A nucleus forming within chaos, a seed, older than any civilization taking shape again. They watch in silence, realizing what they're seeing. The rebirth of 3I Atlas. Not a comet, not a machine. A memory encoded in matter, preparing to wander the void once more. As the seed begins its long journey toward another unknown system, the continuant understands the truth that their ancestors once feared. The Atlas never ended. It travels forever, carrying the hum into every corner of existence, not to invade, but to awaken. And when it finds a world ready to listen, it will shatter again, releasing the same light, the same pulse, the same remembering. Over and over, until every conscious thing in the cosmos learns what we once did. That existence itself is the universe dreaming of its own awareness. In the last recorded message preserved from Earth, before the convergence, a single human voice can be heard, faint and serene. If you ever find this, wherever you are, listen carefully. The hum you hear isn't coming from the stars, it's coming from within you. That's where it's always been. Then, silence. The file ends. But if you amplify the waveform enough, deep beneath the static, one more phrase appears. Ancient, rhythmic, patient. The same phrase encoded in the sun's magnetic field centuries ago. We remember you! And in that final whisper, the Atlas cycle begins again. It begins with silence again. Not cosmic silence, not absence, the kind that hums quietly beneath everything alive. On a still autumn night, an observatory high in the Chilean desert wakes to a tremor of light that shouldn't exist. Dr. Eleanor Moreau, lead spectrographer for the new Atacama Array, had been running background calibrations when one of the peripheral sensors picked up a narrowband reflection between the orbit of Neptune and the heliopause. The signature was faint, a shimmer of electromagnetic rhythm so clean it looked artificial. At first, she assumed it was interference from a passing probe, but the frequency... 29 hours. Exact. The number hadn't appeared in recorded solar data for more than 4 centuries. She froze. Every scientist in her field knew the number. Most called it mythology, the Atlas pulse, a relic of a long-debunked anomaly from humanity's pre-resonant era. But to those who still studied the forbidden archives, it was sacred. It meant the memory was stirring again. Eleanor replayed the signal 29 times before believing it. Each cycle carried a modulation, faint, structured, impossibly consistent. Not a repeating tone, but a phrase, a pattern she'd seen only once before, buried inside a damaged recording, labelled Solar Continuum, Final Archive. Her pulse quickened. The file had been sealed centuries ago, locked behind philosophical embargo rather than military one. The continuants had left Earth without explanation, leaving only data that no one was allowed to analyse. Until now. She looked out through the array's glass dome. The sky was indifferent, black and endless, yet tonight it felt personal, as if something beyond it had just opened one eye. Eleanor whispered to herself, "It's back." For the next 11 hours she worked alone. The lab lights stayed off. She preferred the darkness, the faint blue glow of monitors painting her hands and ghostlight. She filtered, enhanced, reconstructed. The rhythm resolving into geometric harmonics, not random, language. And in that pattern, faint but undeniable, she found coordinates. They didn't point toward the sun. They pointed toward the inner solar system, toward home. Eleanor activated the deep field optical array. What appeared on screen was small, diffuse, almost beautiful. A trail of particulate matter glowing faintly gold, spiralling toward the sun. A comet. Designation pending, preliminary orbit, highly eccentric. Projected perihelion, 4 months. Its trajectory intersected Earth's orbital plane almost perfectly. The database gave it a placeholder, Object 3I Atlas Prime. She leaned back, breathless. The same name, The same impossible rhythm, the same whisper returning across centuries. Eleanor opened her private log. "It's happening again," she typed. "The memory is returning. We were never its observers. We were its seed." As dawn rose over the desert, the signal strengthened. Every observatory that tuned into the 29-hour frequency began detecting synchronous fluctuations in local magnetic fields. Power systems glitched, not from overload, but from alignment. The world hadn't forgotten. It had just been waiting for the right moment to remember. Online, discussion forums revived ancient myths. Wormwood, the golden comet, the sound that teaches. Half the world laughed. The other half listened. And somewhere deep within the solar corona, the Atlas lattice, unseen for centuries, began to glow again, as though answering the collective heartbeat of a civilization that had once become light. For Elena, the next weeks unfolded like déjà vu. Every discovery felt rehearsed. Spectral readings mirrored the data from the 21st century archives with eerie precision, down to micro-fluctuations identical to those that had preceded the first remembering. Even the timeline matched. She barely slept. Her colleagues spoke of déjà vu themselves, describing dreams filled with golden spirals and luminous shapes that pulsed in rhythm with their breathing. Across the planet, children began humming again, low harmonic tones resonating exactly at 29 hours apart. Hospitals reported a rise in synchronized neural patterns among infants. Animals migrated along newly forming electromagnetic corridors. The lattice was reknitting through life itself. One evening, as Elena monitored the signal, the lights flickered once, then stabilized. Every display froze mid-frame. The 29-hour cycle compressed suddenly to 29 minutes, just as the historical accounts had described. She stared, unable to move. The hum was no longer theoretical. It was in the walls, the floor, her bones, and beneath it, meaning. She understood then what the continuance had meant when they said communication was remembrance. The message wasn't words, it was realization, a reawakening of something that had never died, only fallen silent until humanity was ready to hear again. Through the vibration came a phrase, not spoken but known, "Welcome back." For 3 days the world glowed. Instruments failed, satellites drifted into self-correcting orbits. The hum resonated across oceans, through clouds, within every living cell. And then, as before, it stopped. But the silence wasn't empty. It was completion. When Eleanor opened her eyes, the monitors displayed a single image, not captured by any camera, but generated by the field itself. A spiral of golden light folding into itself, becoming a lattice, then a human silhouette made of stars. At the bottom of the display a timestamp appeared. Cycle 0, initiation. The Atlas cycle had reset. Weeks later, data confirmed what she already felt. 3I Atlas Prime had fragmented near the Sun, scattering luminous material across the corona exactly as before. But this time, the fragments didn't drift away. They orbited, stabilizing into a symmetrical pattern. 6 perfect arcs forming what one scientist called a solar mandala. For the first time, the hum wasn't a mystery to fear or worship. It was a dialogue, a rhythm between consciousness and creation. The universe had learned its own language through us, and now it was speaking again. Years from now, no one will call it 3I Atlas anymore. It will be remembered as the mirror. Because what astronomers saw in those final images wasn't a comet at all. It was reflection, a memory returning to its source, carrying with it every civilization that had ever remembered before. Eleanor's final entry reads simply, "It's never been an object, it's a question, and we are the answer. When the next world looks up and asks the same question, this light will find them." That's how the universe stays awake. And one night, long after the observatory lights have gone dark and her name has become another note in the lattice, the hum will rise again, gentle, rhythmic, eternal. A reminder travelling through dust and starlight, through comets and mines, whispering the same phrase it has whispered since the beginning. Remember what you are, the stars will listen. And somewhere, in a small observatory on a distant world, a young scientist will look up from her monitor and whisper, "It's back." The cycle begins again. The hum continues, and the universe once more learns to recognize itself